Right now we're going to discuss the setup and adjustment of Ryonet's new aluminum presses. Right here we have a 4-color 1-station and a 1-color 1-station press. These presses also come in a 2-color 1-station and a 4-color 2-station and a 6-color 2-station. Now all the presses have the same components. This is a newer press that Ryonet sells. It's much sturdier and heavier duty and has a lot more adjustable capabilities than our old steel presses with the magnets. So let's get in and discuss the setup and adjustment of these presses. First, let's discuss the setup and adjustment of the 1-station presses. Right here we have a 1-color 1-station and a 4-color 1-station. The 2-color 1-station also works very similar to the 4-color 1-station, although the only difference is it only has 2 colors versus 4. When you get the 1-color 1-station press, the platen comes underneath it like this, so pretty much all you have to do is take the platen out, undo some tape on the head, and then once the tape is all undone, the head raises up, and then you put the platen on. Do your adjustments on the press after that. Now the adjustments on this head, this print head right here, are the same as the 4-color 1-station. So we're not going to get into this, but you can apply what you learn here to the 1-color 1-station. First, let's discuss the components of this press and show you how to set it up once you get it out of the box. Now this press comes with very basic components. You have your print heads and arm, which are right here in this component. This comes separately packed. And then you have your base and your platen, which comes in another box separately packed. One thing that you will need for these presses are tabletop presses, so you will need a sturdy table. Now depending on your height, you can pick the height of the table or the workbench, but you do need a sturdy table or workbench to bolt or screw these down. Now the presses do come with small metal screws. These will drill into metal or aluminum or wood. Now these screws right here will firmly attach the press to any table. You can also bolt it or use bigger screws if you like, but it does come with a set of small screws. So let's go over how to set this up. This is your print head assembly. Before we attach the print head assembly, it's fairly easy to do. We're going to simply attach this to this sturdy wood table. Now to do this, first you want to get your press centered on the table the way you want it. Now typically I'd have it centered a little bit, maybe 4 to 6 inches back off the table. You don't want it back on the back of the table like this. You want it a little bit near the front. That way you can get in and out of the press. For this demonstration, we're going to put it a little sideways so you can see what I'm doing. Next, you'll need a drill or a screwdriver. It's much easier with electric drill, but you can also use a hand screwdriver. It just takes a little bit longer and a little more arm grease. So once we have our screwdriver, we simply just screw the press base down to the table. And you really don't need to drill holes first with these small screws. Just screw it right in until it's snug. Careful not to drill too tight because you might strip the wood. So now our press is firmly attached to the table. So you have a sturdy table firmly attached to it. Next, let's attach the print head to the base. This is done by simply sliding this on to the center post. Simply line it up and let it drop directly on. Now, it's a snug fit, so you might have to give it a little pressure to push it down. Once it's on, this is a dual bearing system, so it spins very nice and easily for optimal production speed, even for a starter press like this. So as you see, once our print head's attached to the base, we now have to undo some tape off of here. So just use like a little knife and take the tape down. Now, what we have to do is actually attach these arms to the print carousel. So we don't want to undo them all at once, we're going to only undo one at a time. Take that one off first. We also cut the tape underneath the bottom of the arm that holds the stabilizer. Take the tape off. To attach the stabilizing portion of the arm, you will need a 7/16 wrench, ratcheting wrench, or ratchet. You can use a crescent wrench or like something like a needle nose pliers or a vice grip, but it will hurt the bolts right here a little bit more than a standard wrench would. So we'd recommend using those wrenches that we talked about, the 7/16 measurement. So what we'll do first is let this go down in the down position, then we'll take the nuts off the 2 bolts. Next, we'll slide these 2 nuts into the pre-drilled holes in the print head, and then put them down in the down position like that. Next, we'll get our 7/16 ratchet, wrench, or ratcheting wrench. So we'll be using a wrench on the top and then a ratchet on the bottom. Take our 2 bolts and start tightening them. Now these are locking bolts, so you won't be able to tighten them by hand. Once they get snug, you will have to use that wrench, and that's why a ratchet or ratcheting wrench works so much easier. So I'm going to hold the bolt at the top here with my wrench and then secure it on the bottom with the ratchet. As you start to tighten it, don't tighten it all the way snug until both are fitted in. Do the back one. You might have to move it around a little bit to be able to get up in there, depending on what kind of wrench you have and what kind of ratchet you have. Let's switch sides to see a little bit closer angle. You can also come around from the back if you have a problem getting to the back bolt. Once it's snug, then you can tighten it. Tighten it. Don't tighten it too tight to strip it, but tighten it very snugly so it won't loosen later. What we just did is attach the stabilizing arm. This holds the shock, which keeps the arm in the up position or the down position. We simply do that to all 4 heads, 2 heads, or 6 heads, depending on what kind of press that you have. Once all the screen arm stabilizers are attached and tightened, the press is basically set up. What we're now going to do is discuss the different components of the press, show you how to put the platen on, center the platen off, put platen tape on, and other components like that. This press is pretty simplistic. Let's discuss the components. Basically, you have your screen clamp. Your screen clamp is what holds the screen when you print. On the screen clamp, there are several adjustments. You have your off contact adjustment and you have your tilt adjustment. This is your off contact adjustments. You have one on each side. These are adjusted using a 1/2-inch wrench or ratchet. You also have your tilt adjustments. These are these 2 adjustments on the back of the screen clamp. These are also adjusted using your 1/2-inch wrench or ratchet. We'll show how to do that in a moment. Then you have your screen arm. That's this portion right here. We've already discussed the stabilizer for the arm, and to hold the arm up, we have a gas shock. Now these are very heavy-duty gas shocks. We chose to use gas shocks on these presses because they're a little bit more reliable and last longer than magnets and springs. Now these will need to be replaced eventually, but they will last thousands and thousands of impressions. The nice thing about the gas shock is it creates a smooth transition up and down with the screen arm as you're printing. It also creates force on the screen arm in the down position so the press won't snap back up in the up position. So there's a couple different advantages to these gas shocks, and that's why we chose to use them. Inside the press here you have your bearing assembly. Now the bearing assembly fits onto the center shaft of the base. The bearing assembly is a double bearing assembly. It does not need to be lubed because this bearing is a very heavy-duty bearing. Now let's say you get a lot of spray adhesive in there and a couple years down the road you might need to lube it up. There is a grease fitting for this bearing, and you just use standard bearing grease to lube the bearing. But it should last a very long time. If you see this press spin, it spins very smooth, fast, and quickly because we're using very heavy-duty bearings, and from what this press is being used for, these bearings are more than enough to have a very easily moving press. Then we have your base, which we talked about and showed you how to attach to the table. And then you have on the base is your screen gate. Now the screen gate, or the arm gate, is what the arm sits into and how your press registers. This gate has a couple different adjustments. It has your side nylon bolt adjustments. Now these nylon bolt adjustments are set at the factory and should be very snug, so your screen arm shouldn't be able to slide back and forth. These nylon bolts will wear down over time. They're actually meant to do that because the press registers by them hugging the sides of the screen arm. If there were something different, let's say like a bearing or a metal bolt, obviously it would hurt the side of the aluminum screen arm, but the nylon bolt is softer than aluminum, so it doesn't degrade the quality of the arm itself. These are very inexpensive, and you can replace them for about $2 or maybe even a little less than that. They are available through us, but as they wear down, which will take a very long time to wear them down, you simply tighten them up using a 9/16 wrench so they are snug against the side of the screen arm again. You don't want them too tight. You shouldn't have to force this down into the center of the gate. It should be just snug enough so that when the arm is in the down position, it doesn't move from side to side. This is an adjustment that holds the arm up. This is set up at the factory, and you typically don't need to use it or adjust it after the press is set up. The final portion of the press is the platen and the platen bracket. Bracket sits underneath the platen and it screws down to the platen. Now you can get these brackets separately in case you want to make your own platens or in case you want to switch brackets between platens. If you are ordering different pallets with brackets on them or brackets by themselves, you want to make sure you get the pallets or the brackets for this specific press. This is the aluminum tabletop press, not the steel tabletop press with the magnets and not the Riley Hopkins press. This is the aluminum bracket for the aluminum tabletop press. To attach the bracket, you simply loosen the knob on the bottom just a little bit and slide it on. Put the screen arm in the down position. When you're setting up the pallet to begin with, you typically leave about 1 inch of clearance between the pallet and the screen arm in the down position. We're going to make sure it's centered by pressing it against the side of the aluminum extrusion that is the pallet arm. Then we will tighten it up so it's nice and snug. Once it's tightened, it should not move up and down or side to side. So you do want to test that out a little bit. Before we put screens in the press and make those adjustments, we'll first show how to finish setting up the platen on the press. Now we strongly recommend, as we talked about earlier in the DVD and on our website, to center out the platen, meaning that you're going to create a center line in your platen so that you can orient that to the center lines in your artwork and the center lines that burn onto your screen. That makes setup a lot faster and easier to accomplish during that portion of the process. Also, a great thing to use when you're setting up your platen and when you're printing is pallet tape. Pallet tape doesn't come in a lot of the kits, but it is available on the site and through us, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. It comes in a 100-foot roll, so you get a lot of pallet tape when you order it, and that lasts you a long time. Now, pallet tape comes in different sizes. Here we have an 18-inch, and then we have a 16-inch. This is a 16-inch platen, so if we use 16-inch pallet tape, it'll come directly to the edge of our platen. Some people like using pallet tape directly to the edge of their platen. Some people like overlapping it and putting it around their platen. In that case, you would need the 18-inch pallet tape. For this demonstration, we're just going to use the 16-inch pallet tape. Now, to put pallet tape on the press and on the platen, you want to make sure that your platen is clean. So if you've been using it already, you do want to make sure that it's properly cleaned off using like a screen wash or adhesive remover. Next thing you want to do is to center your platen and center the pallet tape on the platen. Once you have the tape snug and squared to the back of the platen, pull it out and bring it down over the front of the platen. Then you can use like a sharp knife to cut around it. And then smooth it out. You want to make sure to not get any bubbles in the center of your tape. That's why you need to make sure everything's very flat. Now the first way to do it is to cut around the edge of the tape, making sure it's very close to the edge of your pallet. If it's too far away, what will happen is it starts to peel up when you put shirts on and off of it. This is the first way to put it on, then we'll show you a second way that most people prefer. Pallet tape accomplishes several things when it comes to your pallet. First, it protects it from heat during flashing. Second is it makes it a heck of a lot easier to clean, because instead of scrubbing your palette, scrubbing all the fuzz and the spray adhesive off the palette, all you have to do is peel the palette tape off. And also, you can take a Sharpie or a pen and mark the palette tape up all you want, and you're actually not marking the palette. You can simply remove the palette tape and then start all over again. Next, let's show using the 18-inch palette tape and how to wrap it around the edge of the palette. So we'll apply it on the back of the palette the same way after we make sure it's centered on the palette or the platen, leaving a little overlap on the back. We'll cut it off straight this time. Using a sharp knife is always easier. This knife's a little dull. Want to make sure that it is straight on here with no bubbles. What you can do is you can take actually the roll, kind of smooth it out like this using the roll, which works as a squeegee, smooths out all the bubbles. It actually does a very good job. Next, we'll just cut these edges off, but we're going to leave room to wrap the tape around the edge. Then we'll make some slits or cuts here. When you're making the cuts, make them all the way to the board itself. Next, we'll wrap it around. And when you wrap it, you want to make sure to wrap it as tight and snug as possible, because if you leave edges out, those edges will then catch on the shirt and your palette tape will start to peel up, which you don't want. Especially around the corners, that's very important. Make sure it's snug onto the palette and smooth on the palette. Now what we'll do is make our center crop marks and our center line in the palette. We do that by using a T-square to ensure that everything's centered. These are 16-inch palettes, so simply mark it with a Sharpie or another pen at the 8-inch mark, and then again at the 8-inch mark on top. Then align those two marks together and make your center line. You do want to verify that this does line up to the center line of the press before you make it. There we are. Right down the center of our palette, centers up to the center line of our press, very good. Palette's all set up, taped off. Now let's put a screen into the screen clamp. When you're setting up your screen, they do come set somewhat up from the factory, so some off contact is set, but you might need to make some small adjustments depending on what kind of job you're doing. Now, the way I like to set the screen up is to have an off contact tab at the end of the screen. That helps you, as you're pulling the squeegee across, to hold the screen up on the end. To do that, the end of your screen needs to hit the top neck portion of your platen. So this needs to come out just a little bit in order for that to happen. Just a little bit more. Make sure everything's centered up again. Tighten down. Then you can center your screen here. If we had artwork on the screen, it would be very easy to tell if our screen was centered, because we would have our center crop marks in our artwork, and we've had our center line right here on the palette that you can see through the screen. Now, if you look at this screen, you can see the off contact is skewed a little bit. Let's get down here and look at it. You can see the angle of the screen is a little bit off. To get a good off contact and tilt, what you want is about a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch, or about the height of a quarter from your screen to your platen, and then you want that even from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to lower the off contact a little bit and adjust the tilt to accomplish that. To do this, we can use an off contact shim or adjustment. Basically, this shim or adjustment is going to be placed underneath the screen like so, and then we're going to loosen everything up, center everything out, push this down to the off contact shim or adjustment, and then tighten it all back up. If everything's done correctly, we won't have to sit there, measure out with our eyes, get down here like this and see if it's set up correctly, because it'll automatically center everything out using this shim or off contact plate. Now this is a piece of corrugated plastic. You can also use cardboard. This is a little thick. We're looking at about maybe 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch here. This one right here is a little thin. What we'll do is we'll set up using an aluminum plate right there like that, to set up more along the lines of a 1/16 of an inch off contact. To make those adjustments, like we mentioned before, we need a 1/2 inch wrench or ratchet. I'm going to use a wrench that has a ratcheting end and then a ratchet, 1/2 inch. Let's first loosen off contact. I'm going to be using my ratcheting wrench for that. So that's in the back of the screen clamp right here. We just loosen these. Once we can move our screen and clamp adjustments up and down freely, we will now loosen the back tilt adjustment. For that, I'm going to be using one end on the ratchet and the other end with the wrench. Just loosen those slightly so those can come up and down. Next, we'll take our screen, set her on down, press it down, and level it out. You want to make sure to press down near the front, press down near the back, it'll press the back of the clamp down. Press down near the front, make sure everything is centered out very nicely. Now we can come back here, tighten everything back up. As we're tightening back up, we want to ensure that things aren't moving on us. If things are moving on us, like the screen, so we kind of want to hold one hand out here to make sure things are staying where they need to be. Tighten the off contact up first, then we'll tighten the tilt up, starting with the bottom bolt. Now sometimes you don't need to adjust the bottom bolt, you just need to loosen the top bolt. The bottom bolt is more of a stabilizer, but if the bottom bolt is too tight, it'll be hard to adjust it, the top bolt, so keep that in mind. Tighten that up there, tighten this one up. You want to make sure these are tight, but not too tight. You don't want to strip them. Now let's check our off contact again. The screen is much more level with a lower off contact than last time. So we're sitting pretty good right now. The last thing we're going to do is put an off contact shim or off contact tab at the edge of the screen to help hold it up. Since we pull the squeegee across it, there's no side clamps, this is a back clamp press. So what this does is this presses against the platen right here and holds the screen up, so it creates that off contact consistency through the whole print. So let's use some screen tape like this and a small quarter. You can also use like a washer, a dime, or a nickel. If you need more off contact, you might use 2 quarters. Put that on the center of the frame. Now with this off contact adjustment tab or shim, you want to make sure that this touches the frame and the platen. You can do it where it touches the mesh, but it doesn't hold the consistency up of the frame. The mesh is obviously not rigid, the frame is rigid. So you want to touch and test here. Basically what we're testing for is to ensure the off contact throughout the whole screen, and you should be able to push down and slightly pop up. Now this off contact is set about a 1/16 of an inch. This is going to be for lighter colors like white with thinner inks. When we're printing on black shirts or dark shirts with thicker inks like white ink, we will adjust our off contact differently for that because the ink's thicker and we need a little bit more off contact for clearance to get that ink down onto the shirt. We'll cover that more later. A couple last things to check for before we actually go to set up the job, which we'll be doing later, is you do want to make sure that all these bolts are snug and tightened. Can't tell you how many times I've actually come to set up a job and started printing when to realize that my off contact bolts were not all the way tightened back up. So you do want to make sure all those are reset up, and then you want to make sure that these nuts are holding the arm centered and snug, so when you put it down, it sits in the same position every time. This is what registers each color to each other, so if these are not snug on the arm itself, the colors will start to lose registration. Once we have confirmed all this and that our off contact is even, the same distance, and our tilt is equal throughout the whole screen and on top of the platen, we are ready to set the job up for printing. We'll now show you how to set up and install a two-station silver press. Keep in mind we've already shown you how to set up the head in a previous section, so you can reference that if you need to. Now, with a two-station silver press, here are your components. You have your base. It's a little bit different than the single-station base, a little bit longer. And then also your arms. Now you have two arms because they rotate. The arms don't matter which direction they go on the press, but you have to keep in mind with your base, there are two sides to the base. There are your flash side and your print side. The print side is going to have a little bit different shaped resting block than the flash side. So make sure that you set up your print side so that this block that's differently shaped and recessed on the sides is facing where you're going to be printing. Next, let's take a look at the table. Now, with the two-station press, you're going to need a little bit sturdier table than a single-station press because it has to print and rotate on both sides. So this is a pretty sturdy table. And then also keep in mind that you don't want too long of a table, because if you have too long of a table, with this particular press, which is a 4-color two-station press, there's also a 6-color two-station press, which is about a foot and a half longer on either side. So this table is about perfect size for a 4-color two-station, and good size as well for a 6-color two-station. But any longer than that with this 4-color, it might be too long for us to print and flash. So I'm going to go ahead and take this head off while we set up the base. Now with the 4-color press, you can probably do that by yourself if you're a strong person. If you're not that strong, I would recommend 2 people. With the 6-color press, it's a lot bigger, so I definitely would recommend a 2-person job setting up the 6-color press. We'll just center this up. I'm going to screw it down after I get the base set up. So this is your arm, your print arm assembly. This has brass bushings in it. These bushings go down over the center block. You want to make sure your block is centered and squared, screwed in. It should come that way, but just double check, make sure it doesn't move around. Then you take your print stations and slide them over directly on top of the center shaft. Now, the upside of the print station, the top of the print stations obviously have the registration gates in them. So you don't want to put this upside down like that. That would be upside down. You want to put it up right side up. Then we'll simply just slide this over, and it's a snug fit. So you might have to you need to make sure that you look down directly over the shaft as you're putting it on. If it gets cockeyed in as it's going over the shaft, then it will not go on. So you need to make sure that it's very up and down, and then it slides all the way down and rests like that. There's no spacer that goes under here. It goes directly on top of the shaft. Next, we'll put the head on. But before we put the head on, it's now time to anchor our press. To anchor our press, it's the same way you anchor the single station press. You just use your screwdriver. You want to make sure that you have enough room on both sides to both print and flash. So right now it's just about perfect. Just use your screws, electric screwdriver or manual screwdriver if you don't have an electric one. You just quickly screw down. Next, let's put our rotating head assembly on. Now with this assembly, it's the same thing as the shaft. There are dual bearings in here, so you do need to make sure that this goes on very, very straight. Once again, if you're not too strong, you want to make this a two-person job, and with the 6-color press, definitely a two-person job. So I'm on straight. If it gets cockeyed, it will get stuck, and you need to try to get it back off. So getting it straight on is very, very important. Let me stress that. Once it's straight on, it will simply slide down. Some might be a little snugger than others, and if it is snug, as long as it's going straight, you can force it down a little bit with a rubber mallet. But if it is cockeyed, if you're pounding it, it's going to really wreck it. So you do not want to force it down. It should slide down as long as it's going straight. Once it's on there straight, the press is basically set up. What we're going to demonstrate now is how to print with this press and how to rotate the pallets. So let's get the pallets on first of all. These are 18 by 20 pallets. They're a little bit bigger than typically come with the press. The press typically comes with a 16 by 16 pallet. Go ahead and get my job set up. Do a real quick job that'll show you how to demonstrate and print flash print with this press. Make sure we have a little bit of off contact there. We do. We want to make sure our pallet is centered on both sides. So this pallet is the same distance away from the registration gate as the other pallet. So we'll measure this. Comes in right at 5 inches. To rotate the pallet, you simply lift up. You can either rotate left or right. If you don't lift up, it won't rotate. Lifting up moves it off the resting block. Then you lift that up again. Measure to the correct spot and center off your pallet. Now we have our pallets set and they're even on both sides of the press. I'm going to move the flash dryer over the press now because we're in the printing position. Now the press is set up and we're ready to print. Just going to make sure we have a little tack on our pallet. On your flash dryer, you want to make sure it's probably about 2 or 3 inches above the pallet. Got tack down. Once this press is set up, it's centered very, very nicely. It will spin very nice and very quickly. Both the pallets and the screens. So as you print, we're going to do a print flash print and then we're also going to do a print cure. We'll load our shirt. You don't want your flash to sit over the pallet too long. So we want to be quick about this. So we'll just demonstrate a quick print flash print. That'll start flashing there. Pallets rotate fairly easily. And while that one's flashing, we can print again on this one. Now with a black on a gray shirt, we really don't need a print flash print, but this is just to demonstrate. So to do our final cure, I do recommend taking the shirt off the pallet and then setting it down either to the side or somewhere like this. You want to make sure that you're not bending the shirt over itself so you don't get the wet ink to stick to each other. But if you set it down like this, it will protect the pallet and make the pallet last longer and make the pallets cooler. If you keep it stuck to the pallet, it's going to be harder to cure because the ink won't be able to penetrate through the garment. It'll basically be stuck against a hard board surface or aluminum surface. And of course, you want to make sure that you're temping your ink to ensure that it reaches 320 degrees and you get a final cure here. But this is how you print, flash print with this press. And as you can see, it rotates fairly fast and easily. Pretty easy to print with. And then once it's on that block, it's very sturdy as well, as long as it's on a sturdy table.